The pen trembled slightly between her fingers, but her eyes never left the door. Every morning, before the cafe even unlocked its glass doors to the sleepy street outside, Eva stood behind the counter pretending to organize receipts she'd memorized. By now, what she was really doing was waiting, not for a tip, not for her shift to end, but for him. No one knew his name, not even her manager, who usually prided himself on remembering every regular's birthday and weird coffee orders. The man came in every Thursday at 8 a.m. sharp. He'd order a black Americano with a single sugar cube, sit at the far corner table by the window, read from a leather-bound notebook, stay exactly 43 minutes, and then vanish. Eva never dared to speak beyond the routine. Good morning, and here's your coffee, sir. But every time their fingers brushed as he took the cup, a strange warmth climbed from her wrist to her throat. Lena, her best friend and the only other waitress on morning shifts, had caught on long ago. You look at him like he's the answer to a question you're afraid to ask. Lena had teased one day, balancing a tray of empty mugs. Eva had only smiled, but that night, she went home and scribbled that very line into her journal. Truth was Eva had no right falling for a stranger. Her life wasn't a romance novel. Her mom was sick. Bills were unpaid. The rent was always 2 days from eviction. She didn't even have time to dream, let alone act on one. But this Thursday, something felt different. She noticed it as soon as she woke up. Her little brother's fever had broken. A job offer for a night shift cashier had finally called her back. And as she entered the cafe, rays of sunlight streamed through the windows in a way they never had. Like the universe was paying attention. At 8 a.m. sharp, the bell over the door jingled. Eva froze. It was him, the stranger, only this time, he wasn't alone. Another man in a suit followed closely behind, speaking quietly to him. But the man only nodded and made his way against the window table. Alone. The second man lingered at the door a moment, longer, then left. He's early, Lena whispered, nudging Eva. Eva didn't answer. She was staring at his hands. There was a tension in them today. His knuckles were taut around the notebook. His jaw flexed once. He looked tired. Without a word, Eva poured the coffee herself, added a sugar cube, then did something she'd never done before. She flipped over his receipt. Her fingers moved quickly, heart hammering in her ears. You always sit here like the world rests on your shoulders. Just wanted you to know someone notices. Also, you have kind eyes. Eva, she folded the receipt beneath the cup, walked over slowly, and placed it down. He looked up. Their eyes met this time. He held it. Thank you, he said, voice deeper than she expected. You're welcome, she replied. Then she turned and walked away, pulse wild. Behind her, she could hear the gentle crinkle of paper unfolding. She didn't know this moment, this tiny, trembling decision would alter the course of her life. She didn't know that the man she just called kind was, in fact, the CEO of a billion-dollar firm, and that from that table by the window, he'd been watching her for months. When she'd finally say something, for the next hour, Eva couldn't concentrate on a single task. Her hands worked automatically, refilling cream pitchers, wiping tables, nodding at customers, but her thoughts circled one thing, the note. That folded receipt with her heartbeat scrawled across it. She didn't dare glance his way again. Every fiber of her being told her not to. What if he read it and laughed? What if he showed it to someone? What if she had crossed a line and ruined everything? Lena sidled up beside her as she was restocking sugar packets. So, you actually did it, she whispered, eyes wide. Eva didn't answer. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to rip open a box of sweetener. Lena grinned. You're either having a breakdown, or you just leaped off the emotional cliff. I'm guessing both. Eva cracked a nervous smile, but still said nothing. Then, she heard it. The scrape of a chair leg on tile. He was leaving. Her breath caught. Was that it? No reaction? No response? She watched from the corner of her eye as he walked past the counter, notebook tucked beneath his arm. But this time, he paused. He turned, and placed a folded piece of paper on the edge of the counter. Eva blinked. Before she could say anything, he gave her a small, unreadable smile and left the cafe, the bell above the door ringing like a punctuation mark. She stared at the note like it was radioactive. Well, Lena prodded, inching closer. Is that what I think it is? Eva picked it up with shaking fingers, unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the neat, measured handwriting. People rarely notice what matters. Thank you for doing so. Maybe next time, I'll tell you what you got right and what you didn't. Her stomach did a strange flip. She read the note again. And again. Lena leaned in, reading over her shoulder. He wrote back, Eva. That's not just a thank you. That's something. Eva folded the note, like it was something sacred, and tucked it into her apron. For the rest of the day, everything felt surreal. Like the cafe was somehow brighter, the customers softer, even the coffee easier to pour. But under it all, there was this question growing in her heart. What did he mean by what you didn't get right? Had she misjudged something? That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her narrow twin bed, staring at his note under the glow of her desk lamp. It was short, polite, a little cryptic, but it held weight, intent. And that name, just an initial, J. In the morning, curiosity had fully taken root. She needed to know more. So She did something she had never done before. She looked him up. It took 3 hours, cross-referencing coffee, shop CCTV timestamps, LinkedIn photos, and a handful of sleuthing tricks she'd picked up from Lena's true crime obsessions. But finally there he was. James Alexander Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Innovations, a tech firm that had quietly grown into one of the most successful startup-to-empire stories in the last decade, worth over $3 billion. Known for staying out of the spotlight, rare interviews, fiercely private, Eva stared at the screen in disbelief. The man who sat in her cafe every Thursday with the worn leather notebook was a millionaire. No-billionaire.n. She had just left a flirty note on his receipt. Her mind reeled. 100 new questions poured in. Why her cafe? Why that seat? Why no security? But more than all that, one question pulsed above the rest. Why didn't he ever say anything? The next Thursday, she barely slept. Her uniform was pressed to perfection. Her apron had no stains. And her hair, usually thrown into a quick ponytail, was softly curled. Not too much. Just enough. At 7:58 a.m., she stood behind the counter, pretending to polish a coffee pot she'd already cleaned 3 times. 8 o'clock, A.M. The bell rang. He walked in, same as always, calm, sharp, alone. Only this time, he looked directly at her and nodded once, like they shared a secret. Eva smiled back, her pulse racing. Today she was ready for the next note. What she didn't know was that James had already decided today. He wasn't just going to respond today. He was going to change everything. The first thing Eva noticed was that he wasn't carrying the notebook. James, if that truly was his name, always had it. Worn leather, soft spine, pages that peeked like secrets on the verge of being spoken. But this morning, as he stepped into the cafe, his hands were empty. No bag, no briefcase, just him. Eva's breath caught in her throat. Something was different. Didn't go straight to table 9. He walked up to the counter. Morning, he said, voice calm, almost casual. Eva blinked. Hi, she managed, praying her voice didn't betray the storm inside her chest. Your usual, he smiled softly. Yes, but maybe to go this time. That stung a little. She couldn't help it. Oh, sure, she said, reaching for the cup with a hand that shook slightly. She hoped he wouldn't notice. I read your note again, James said, eyes on her, steady. Several times, actually. Eva still continued. You were right about something, and also, wrong. She didn't know whether to laugh or apologize. I wasn't really trying to be right. She shrugged, wrote what I felt. That's rare, he said. Most people only say what they're supposed to. You didn't. She felt the words land deepenest and heavy like truth always is. I meant it, Eva said quietly. It seemed like someone who carries more than he says. His gaze dropped for a second. Then, he nodded. Most people don't notice the weight, he murmured. They just expect the delivery. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, just full. Then he reached into his pocket and slid a card across the counter. It was blank on one side. On the other, a handwritten address and a time come by if you're curious, he said. No pressure. And just like that, he took his coffee, nodded once, and left. Eva stared after him, the cup still steaming in his wake. She turned over. The card. It wasn't a business address, it was a park. Saturday, 4 p.m., she stared at it like it might dissolve in her hands. Lena walked up behind her, chewing on the corner of a granola bar. What's that look? She asked. He'd leave another note. Eva turned the card toward her. Lena raised an eyebrow. That's either super romantic or incredibly cryptic. I think it's both, Eva whispered. Saturday came quicker than she expected. Her shift ended early, and she spent the better part of an hour choosing what to wear. Not too formal, not too casual, something that said I'm not intimidated by billionaires. Even if she was. The park was quiet when she arrived. Golden light slanted through the trees, and families sat scattered on benches and blankets. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Somehow, that made it worse. She spotted him before he saw her. He was seated on a wooden bench, beneath an old oak tree, sleeves rolled, eyes tilted upward toward the branches like he was listening to something only he could hear. She walked over slowly, heart in her throat. He looked up. You came. Eva sat beside him. You invited me. He smiled. Most people don't accept invitations unless there's something to gain. She folded her hands in her lap. Maybe I came to lose something. His brow lifted slightly. Like what? The weight of wondering, she said. The what-ifs, the stories I make up in my head. James tilted his head. What do those stories say about me? You're complicated, sad maybe, smart, lonely, powerful, but tired. He didn't reply immediately. When he did, it was with a quiet voice. Lonely, he repeated. That one's accurate. They sat in silence for a while, not needing to fill it, just breathing. Finally, he turned to her. You want to know who I am? I already know, Eva replied. But I want to know why you're here, in my cafe, every week, alone. He looked at her. Really looked, because it's the only place I've ever felt anonymous. He said, I built a life that everyone watches. Every move I make is analyzed, applauded, or criticized. But your cafe, it's quiet, uninterested. You just serve coffee. You smile. You're not looking for anything. Eva hesitated, but I left the note. He smiled. Yes, you did? And for the first time in a long time, someone saw me. Not the job, not the name, just me. She looked down at her hands, unsure what to do with all the weight his words left between them. Why did you give me the card? She asked. Because you changed something, James said simply. You didn't mean to, but you did. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I was going to offer this to someone else, a stranger, but I changed my mind. Eva took the paper, slowly opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter, a job offer. Not just any job, executive assistant, personal, confidential, directly reporting to the CEO. She read it twice, then looked at him, stunned. Why? Me. James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Because trust isn't something I buy anymore. I wait for it to show up uninvited, and you did. Ava's throat tightened. The wind stirred the leaves above them, and the moment suddenly felt suspended in something bigger than both of them. She had just come to hand someone coffee, and now, her whole life was shifting. What she didn't know yet was that this offer, this unexpected, impossible offer, wasn't just about a job. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could have written, alone. Eva didn't sleep the night she got the offer. She sat at her kitchen table long after midnight. The letter lying open in front of her like it had been left there by someone had addressed it to the wrong person. Executive assistant to the CEO. It didn't sound real. It didn't sound like her. She wasn't qualified. She hadn't gone to a fancy school, hadn't taken business classes, hadn't stepped into a corporate building in her life. She poured coffee, she cleaned syrup off countertops, she worked double shifts when the rent was late and counted tips in coins. But James had looked at her like she already belonged in his world, and that scared her more than anything. The next morning, she called in sick, a rare move for her, but she needed the space to think. She needed quiet to battle the noise inside her head. Around noon, a knock came at her door. She opened it cautiously, and there he was, James. Not in a suit, just jeans, a hoodie, and an expression somewhere between curious and concerned. Sorry for showing up unannounced, he said. I just figured if you hadn't called, maybe you needed a reason to talk it out. Eva stepped aside and let him in, heart thudding so loud it drowned out her thoughts. I don't belong in your world, she said before he could even sit. I don't have the degree. I don't know how boardrooms work. I don't even know what kind of assistant you actually need. James sat down at her tiny kitchen table, next to her stack of unpaid bills and half-eaten toast. I know what I don't need, he said. I don't need someone pretending to be perfect. I don't need someone who's impressed by money. I don't need another puppet with a polished resume. He looked at her, unblinking. I need someone who speaks when they're afraid. Someone who sees people clearly. Someone who reminds me I'm still human. She swallowed hard. You don't know me. I know enough, he said gently. You wrote a note you could have been fired for. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen. You came to the park even though you didn't have to. That's not nothing. Ava's hands twisted in her lap. I've failed at more than I've succeeded. Good, James said. That means you know how to get back up. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she let herself wonder what if this offer wasn't a mistake. What if it was earned? I don't want to just be your assistant, she said finally. If I do this, I need to know. I'm not walking into a life where I disappear behind your title. James nodded slowly. Deal. But just know my world isn't easy. It's not warm like your cafe. There are people who smile and scheme at the same time. People who don't think someone like you belongs in the room. Then maybe, Eva said, someone like me needs to be there more than ever. Something shifted in his eyes, then a flicker of respect that hadn't been there before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't attraction. It was something WEIGHTIER. Recognition. That night, she accepted the offer. Within a week, her life changed. She stepped into a high-rise building with trembling hands and a borrowed blazer. Her name was printed on a temporary badge. She was shown to a private elevator that skipped the executive floors and went straight to the top. James was already in his office when she arrived, typing something rapidly. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, You made it. Eva set her bag down, unsure of what to do with her hands. Barely. I almost turned around twice. You'll stop feeling that way, he said, eventually. But she didn't nod at first. The world she entered was sharp-edged and fast-moving. People in glass offices spoke in numbers and strategy. Elevators didn't wait. Phones rang with urgency. Mistakes weren't tolerated, and she made a few. But she didn't quit. She asked questions. She stayed late. She listened. And James kept his word. He never treated her like a prop. He invited her into meetings, asked for her opinion, challenged her when she undersold herself. Slowly, the others noticed. One by one, board members who'd scoffed behind her back began to stop underestimating her, but none of them knew the full truth. That this girl who now held confidential documents and sat beside the CEO during quarterly reviews had once wiped down tables in a diner and scribbled notes on coffee receipts. Until the gala. It was an annual fundraiser. Black tie, journalists, investors, and CEOs from across the country. Eva wore a borrowed gown and a pair of heels she couldn't walk in properly. James stayed close by her side, introducing her not as an assistant, but as someone without whom this company would not function. Later that night, when she stepped out onto the balcony to escape the crowd, a woman approached her. "You're Eva, right? From the cafe on Worth." Eva froze. The woman laughed softly. "I recognized you. My husband and I used to go there every Sunday. I always told him you were too sharp to stay behind that counter." Eva smiled politely, unsure what to say. "You wrote something once, didn't you?" the woman said. "On a receipt?" Eva's heart stopped. "How do you?" But before she could finish, James stepped out onto the balcony and slipped an arm lightly around her shoulder. The woman smiled knowingly. "I guess I was right." When she left, Eva turned to James, eyes wide. "You told people?" He shook his head. "Never, but maybe. It's time we stopped pretending you were ever just the girl who worked behind the counter." Eva looked up at him, the city lights shimmering below. For the first time, she didn't feel out of place. She felt exactly where she was meant to be. Asterisk, the photo was everywhere. By morning, Eva's face alongside James's had been splashed across finance blogs, local newsreels, and social media feeds. CEO spotted at gala with mystery woman, sources say she was once a waitress. That was the headline. It came with blurry photos, half-truths, and online speculation that spread faster than wildfire. Eva sat in James's office, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive, some weren't. "Didn't ask for this kind of attention," she said softly, staring at the screen as if willing it to stop glowing. James leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "No one ever does, but it's part of the world I live in. It finds people who come close to me." "Your world," she repeated, her voice heavy. This was supposed to be about work, quiet impact, something real behind closed doors, headlines and labels. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "They'll forget in a week." Eva looked up sharply. "Will they? Or will I always be the waitress who got lucky?" There was pain behind her words, not bitterness, just truth. "The kind you earned through years of being looked past. You didn't get lucky," James said quietly. "You changed your life. With one act of bravery. Don't let them rewrite that." She bit her lip. "And what if this gets worse? What if people say I'm here because of that note, and not because I've actually earned my place?" James stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "Then you keep proving them wrong, every single day." Later that week, Eva was pulled into a board meeting. It wasn't supposed to involve her, but something was wrong. A major investor had backed out of a partnership deal last minute, citing reputational volatility. In plain terms, they didn't like the press storm. They questioned James's judgment. When Eva walked into the room, the temperature dropped. Some of the board members glanced at each other. A few whispered. One, a silver-haired man in his 60s, said aloud, "Perhaps we should speak freely, without guests." James didn't flinch. "She's not a guest. She's my executive assistant. She's part of this." The man's smile was icy. "Yes, well, some of us are concerned that personal entanglements are now interfering with professional stability." Eva felt her stomach twist, but she didn't drop her gaze. James turned to her. "Eva, tell them what you found." She blinked. "The projections?" He nodded. Eva stepped forward, opening her tablet with calm precision. "I noticed something in the market trend report from Q2, the investor who pulled out. They've been funneling funds into a rival firm for the last 3 months. This wasn't about headlines, it was a setup to weaken our leverage before the next tech release." The room went quiet, she continued, scrolling through the evidence. "They knew the story would go public. They counted on it distracting us, but they didn't count on someone paying attention to their silent moves." For the next 10 minutes, Eva walked them through a trail of data that exposed the truth. By the time she finished, even the silver-haired skeptic looked pale. James gave her a nod. "You just saved us months of backpedaling." She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply returned to her seat, steady and sure. After the meeting, James caught up to her in the hallway. "You didn't have to step in like that." "Yes, I did," she replied, "because I earned this seat, and I wasn't about to let them think otherwise." That night, as she sat on the roof of her apartment building, her secret spot, the only place that still felt untouched, her phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't a headline. It was a message from her younger sister. Eva hadn't heard from her in almost a year. Their lives had grown distant too. Branches on opposite sides of a fractured tree. The message was simple. "I saw you on the news. I'm proud of you. I still remember how you used to count tips under your pillow and say, 'One day, this will all change.' I think that day is here." Eva stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. She remembered that too. Nights where the coins barely added up, where dreams felt silly, and hope was a luxury. And now here she was, fighting for her place. Not just in a company, but in a world that had always told girls like her to stay small. Down below, the city lights blinked like constellations. But she wasn't looking up anymore. She was looking forward, because something deep had shifted. She wasn't hiding behind coffee cups anymore. She wasn't just reacting to moments, she was shaping them. The girl who once scribbled a note on a receipt was now holding meetings with billionaires. decoding betrayals, and earning her place in every room she walked into, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an outsider hoping to be invited in. She was the one unlocking the door. Asterisk. The moment Eva walked into the auditorium, she felt the air shift. It wasn't just the size of the room though. The 100-foot ceilings and tiered seats were intimidating. It was the weight of what today meant. This was the company's annual Innovation Summit. Investors, press, global partners, everyone was here. And for the first time, James wasn't opening the event. He had asked Eva to. She stood backstage, fingers gripping the edges of her note cards, even though she'd memorized every word. Her reflection stared back at her from the monitor. Makeup, pressed suit.com expression. But beneath all of it, her heart pounded like it still belonged to the girl who once wiped counters and refilled sugar jars. The lights dimmed. A tech assistant gave her the signal, and as she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell across the room. Hundreds of eyes turned to her, not with mockery, but curiosity. A few in the front row already whispered, "That's her. That's the one from the headline." She stood in front of the mic, took one deep breath, and smiled. "My name is Eva Moore, and 2 years ago, I was serving coffee in a corner cafe hoping someone might see more in me than an apron." The silence cracked open into soft gasps. She let the words linger before continuing. "Today, I'm standing here not because of a shortcut, or a favor, or luck. I'm here because someone did see something. But more importantly, I started seeing it in myself." Her speech wasn't rehearsed to sound polished. It was real. It traced her journey from receipt notes to decoding executive betrayals, from quiet self-doubt to standing at the center of change. She didn't quote business textbooks. She talked about perseverance, about the night she almost walked away from this job, about how courage sometimes comes in the form of showing up, day after day, when no one's clapping. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer than she expected. And then the applause began. Not polite, not forced. Earned. James watched from the wings. He didn't approach her immediately. He let her have the moment, because it was hers. Later that night, when they returned to the office to catch up on the day, Eva found a letter sitting on her desk. Handwritten, no name, just the words. "You reminded me who I was before I got afraid. Thank you." There was no signature, just initials AD. She stared at it for a long moment, then folded it slowly. Maybe it was from a junior employee, maybe a senior partner. It didn't matter. She'd made someone feel seen. And that, more than any title or gala, made everything worth it. Just as she was slipping the note into her drawer, James knocked lightly on the doorframe. "You've got one more surprise," he said. Before she could ask, he stepped aside, and a woman entered, mid-40s, worn denim jacket, familiar tired eyes. "Mom?" Eva whispered. Tears sprang instantly to her eyes. She stood frozen as her mother crossed the room, arms shaking. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the eviction, the hospital bills, the weight of silence after her father passed. "I saw your speech," her mother said, voice cracking. "I didn't know how to reach you, but I had to come." Eva walked into her arms like a child again, no words. Just years collapsing between them. That night, they sat on the office couch, mother and daughter, drinking vending machine tea and telling stories like they used to, when life was simpler and dreams were scribbled on napkins. The city below glittered through the glass walls. Eva looked out, her mother's hand in hers. She wasn't just a girl with a second chance anymore. She was someone who had made space for others to find theirs. And as the sky darkened and the city hummed, she realized something quietly powerful. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is believe you're worthy of being seen. From a note on a receipt to the top floor of a tower. Eva's story hadn't just changed her life, it was changing others. And this was only the beginning.